In a relationship, when is honesty not the best policy? How do you balance what you want versus what you need? And is there something you need to say to your spouse, but can't find the right way to say it? If so, then you're in the right place. This is the Lunch with Sandy podcast. With nearly 20 years of marriage under their belts, Terrence and Sandy Jackson discuss a range of topics, provide valuable insights on relationships, and talk about the conversations married couples need to have. So what does lunch have to do with all of this? Well, it's a metaphor for how these conversations originally started. Speaking of conversations, let's get one going. Here's your hosts, Terrence and Sandy.
Hello and welcome to the Lunch with Sandy podcast. I'm Terrence.
And I'm Sandy.
And as usual, we are having the conversations that couples need to have. What's going on, Sandy? It's been a long week.
Yeah, it is. I could use another long weekend. But...
Yeah, it's been a long week and we've had an actual short week.
I know. Short weeks are longer weeks.
That's because there's always so much stuff that you try to fit in.
Yep.
That one day that you actually have off, you try to do so much.
Yep.
And then you get back to work and you have all that stuff that didn't get done at work on that day that you actually have to catch up on.
Yeah, because you don't really get a reprieve from work. You just have to smush 4 days of work. 5 days of work into four instead of spreading it out.
Yeah. So today we're going to be having a conversation about the couple that pays together. But before we get into that, I want to get into the spotlight of the week.
Okay.
And the spotlight of the week, you may not know this, the spotlight of the week can be an individual. It can be a place. It can be an idea. My spotlight of the week is the movies.
Okay.
Yesterday, we all went to the movies and we saw The Little Mermaid.
Yep.
And I'm sitting there watching The Little Mermaid. And then when the first song comes on, it took me back.
It did take me back.
It took me back. They did an excellent job, but it took me back. And so my spotlight of the week is the movies. Everybody go out and see The Little Mermaid. Go see a movie.
She has a beautiful voice.
She does, almost as beautiful as mine. They called me, but I was busy, so I couldn't play the part.
Oh.
You know.
Oh, is that the only reason?
Yeah, I didn't want to take the fork and put it in my hair.
Gotcha.
Get it all tangled up. So, as I said earlier, I want to talk about the couple that pays together. That's the new phrase, right? The new phrase is the couple that pays together stays together.
Okay.
And I wanted to have a conversation because I know some individuals who have been together for a long time, and I think time plays a big role in this, but have been together for a long time and are married, but yet they have separate bank accounts.
Yes.
So I wanted to get your take on how you feel about separate bank accounts. And granted, when you first come together as a couple, obviously, I think that, you are going to have separate bank accounts. But as you grow and as you get closer together and possibly move in and get married, the question becomes, does the money stay separate? Because, I know you like to say this, what's yours is mine and what's mine is mine. Yes,
not you, but mine. Right.
Yeah.
What is yours is mine and what mine is mine. So I met this older woman. It was like years ago. And I don't even know how we even got on the subject. I think she was looking for something in a store and, separate conversation that we've talked about plenty of times. People just start conversating with me.
Yep.
And I conversate back, but I never barely ever, I should say, initiate the conversation. But she was a much older woman. And she said, every woman needs to have a little money of their own on the side.
Now, listen, so now I want to take what you just said and I want to make sure that we break this down because I think that's a little different. So what she's saying, and again, from the perspective of she's from an older generation, the times were different, good, bad, and different. But at the time, I'm guessing in her time, the woman was fairly reliant on the male because of the roles that they played in that time.
Yep.
And so in that situation, the male really had most of the power because the wife had a very, very hard job of taking care of whether it be kids in the home. And I don't want to minimize that. But the male was out working and was bringing the cash in. And I'm not saying that is, I think from the perspective of 50-50, that should be 50-50. But, back in the day, it was a little different. They didn't do things like that. So having a stash is one thing. This is more of a sense where, okay, well, you know what? You do your business. I do my business. This is my bank account. That's your bank account.
Yeah. So it does make me wonder, right? Like certain parts of the relationship, if they're, tied together in a way, if it's just coincidence or not coincidence. But, so like we don't get each other really gifts, right? Because it's because all of our money is together. It's all shared. I feel like it's just we're buying each other something like that. The money's all stashed together. But to people who have separate accounts, is it that, I sometimes it makes me consider, do people keep it separate because then they actually do buy each other gifts and they're trying to,
So I think
keep it from one another. How can you keep a secret if you have a shared account, which I know is difficult, right?
Well, I there's some relevance to some of that. I think that I think there's pros and cons, right? I think that if couples have separate bank accounts, on each side there is a sense of autonomy, right? There's a sense of financial freedom. There's a sense of independence. There's a sense of you can kind of spend your money the way that you want to spend it.
Right. You're not going to have your spouse saying, "Did you spend blank blank at blank blank?"
My spouse does that.
I do that often.
She does. Listen, if I go buy a muffin, did you buy a muffin?
And that is not
I'm
true,
grown. I could buy a muffin.
I tend to look at the bank accounts more.
Yes, and I don't. But I do think that there's a sense of empowerment that comes along with having, having the freedom to say, I can do what I want with my money. Mm-hmm. Those are some of the pros. Now, I think the one thing that I would ask someone who looks at that and say, okay, well, why are you getting that sense of empowerment or that sense of freedom out of being financially separate? I know that it can provide that. But I think depending on who the individual is, I think that, the view might be a little different. But at the same time, having separate bank accounts can also have some drawbacks. They can bring up some pain points, right? Mm-hmm. Because you have your bank account, I have my bank account. Okay, well, I don't have access to your money. What are you hiding over there?
Yeah.
It's not, you're not transparent. And if we are a couple, let's say we're living together, let's say we're married or not, there's going to be financial responsibilities that are going to have to be shared.
Yeah.
And we'll get into some other things a little bit down the road, but if there's not transparency, right? And we have these responsibilities, the question can come up, okay, well, are you really doing your share?
Yep.
Based off of what I'm doing, because I don't know what you got and you don't know what I got. Mm-hmm. And I just think that you can start to develop a sense of mistrust when if you're not careful in that situation. And again, I know people who are married and have a separate bank account.
Yeah.
Now, I guess you could be in a situation where, and this might be a compromise because it's one of the C's. You can have separate bank accounts, but then have a joint account.
I was going to say most of the people that I know that have separate bank accounts have one shared account, like the expenses account. But I am curious if people keep things completely separate, like, hey, I pay the electric, you pay the gas. Like, do they do it that way or what when they completely separate it? But to your point before, not having it, like, how do you determine where you are if you have like common goals? So say,
Exactly.
hey, we need blank amount of money so that we can redo our kitchen.
Good example.
You save, I save, like, to your point, is that going to be arguments? Like, you promised you were going to save this much and you haven't. Like, what's going on?
True.
Does that start asking questions and then a little bit of seeds of mistrust, like you said?
Now, what if your goals are different?
Oh, yeah.
That's the other thing. You want to save it for a kitchen. Listen, I want a new bike. Or
I knew you were going to say that.
Or I just saw John Wick 4. I want that Pit Viper 9mm at a cool $7,000.
A good looking
and that's it was nice. It was nice. And that's not to say that one person wouldn't put in towards saving towards what the other person's goal is, but maybe they might be putting more towards theirs. Now, what happens if you actually, and we're human, you guys get into an argument. I'm gonna take a little bit from that fund that I saved for you, and I'm gonna put it over here because now I need to. And I think we may have had this conversation, about and maybe we haven't. I think that was part of this episode here. I like to shop, and I shop and that's not me saying I like to shop, but I'm saying as an example, when I'm upset, I shop. And so you upset me. Now I got to take a little bit of your money, and I got to go, relieve some stress by buying some things.
Yeah, I am interested to understand how the conversations are. I think when it's shared, it's slightly different because our money is just commingled in there. It's not like, that $100 is mine and that $100 is yours. And, it's not like that. It's like, okay, well, we got $200 in our account. What do we have that needs to get paid?
Yeah, I think
before the next paycheck comes.
I think the individuals will play a role in that. Like in our situation, I never look at the accounts. I mean, you could be robbing me blind. I wouldn't know it.
I am.
I don't look at the accounts. But again, the situation, there are some people who just aren't as financially responsible as other individuals. And so now it's a situation where do they hand over the keys and say, okay, I want you to handle this? Or are they stubborn and they just start blowing money in? At some point, you got to say, hey, listen, this is why we need to have separate accounts. So I can see there are scenarios where, it might come up. I just think it's a double-edged sword, and you got to be very careful because depending on the individual, they can look at it and say, okay, you hiding something.
Well, that, or you have to have a lot of trust in one another. Because to your point, right, you don't really look at our bank accounts, but you have access to it. You can go in there and just pop in and take a look at any point.
Yeah. I didn't know this was in here.
Right. So, while I know that there's some trust here in that I'm not just blowing all of our money.
Yeah.
At the same time, it doesn't need to be that in depth because you can always go look.
Yeah.
But people who have separate accounts, you definitely have to have that trust that you're still trying to go to that same common goal.
Yeah, it's trying to reach that same level.
Maybe you just don't have common goals.
I mean, listen.
I don't know. Like, if it's my money, your money, well, this is my retirement money, and that's your retirement. It's not my problem you didn't save enough for your retirement.
No, it's our retirement money. Your retirement money is more than mine. It's ours. Yeah, and I'm not saying one is better than the other. I do think there's pros and cons to both. And I think that depending on who the individuals are in that relationship and the amount of time that they've actually been together, I think that, it could have an adverse effect. And I say the amount of time because, listen, if I walk into a relationship and it's been, let's say, 2-3 months, and I come in with a grip, I come in with a lot. And you sitting on the couch eating bonbons, not doing nothing. You ain't taking care of the house. We ain't got no kids, nothing like that. we may have to have some separate bank accounts.
Well, it could be even more than just. It could even be longer term, to be honest.
Oh, yeah,
What's the new statistic out there that 7 or 8 out of marriages end in divorce?
Yeah, and
like,
I think
you ain't getting none of this. Like,
so. When I hear
with
those,
this, I'm leaving this.
When I hear those numbers, right? There's a lot of questions that run through my mind to say, okay, well, why did that only last a certain amount of time? And I don't want to get into that too much, but that could play a part of it. And I do think that when you start to think about, okay, well, I've met someone, we're getting kind of serious. We're heading down this path. Unfortunately, now you have to start thinking about some things like that. And that's not saying, oh, let's get a prenup. But again, you don't want to put yourself in a situation where, you don't have that freedom from a financial perspective, or you don't feel empowered to do what it is that you need to do. Not necessarily what you want to do, but what you need to do because of a decision that you didn't really think through a whole lot.
Yeah. And, to your point before, it's not one's better than the other, but at the same time, it does make me wonder a couple of things. So one, is it because, listen, I just don't want you all up in my business. Like,
And true.
That, I wonder if it changes once you have like kids in a relationship.
Yeah.
Because kids bring a whole other different level to financial concerns.
So you mentioned kids, and now I'd have to wonder, all right, now you have kids. Mm-hmm. Let's say you get to that point, you have kids. You have separate bank accounts. That got to get messy. That has to get messy.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to say messy. I think it becomes a challenge now because, you both got to provide for those kids. And I guess it depends on the couple, because one person can say, hey, listen, I'm going to handle all these expenses. You handle all those expenses. But what happens when someone doesn't meet, the terms that they were supposed to meet? And
things come up all the time.
Yeah.
Not even not being able to meet like specific, like recurring bills. But what about the stuff that just comes out of nowhere?
Yeah.
1 year your kid is growing at a steady pace. The next year they're growing like crazy, like a freaking weed, and you're having to buy stuff over and over again because they're just going from one size to the next size, and they can't even stay in their clothes or shoes more than like 6 months.
Yeah, it gets complicated. And listen, I mean, it's doable, but you know me. I don't even go to the bank unless I got to go open an account. I don't go to the bank. I don't go to the ATM. I don't do none of that stuff.
Yeah, I know.
I know you know. I know you know. I know you know because you got to get all that stuff for me. I just think that having the joint accounts just makes it easier. Mm-hmm. And again, I ain't trying to hide nothing. I mean, look, I don't even look at. I got direct deposit. I don't even look at my pay stuff.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then I also have like recurring stuff, like trying to put money in certain accounts for certain
Christmas
expenditure.
fund,
yeah,
all that
which
stuff.
You don't even look at that either.
Yeah.
Like,
I don't look at none of that. You got what in the Christmas? Who the what? Look at Santa. Look at this black Santa sitting right there.
Right. So like, and to be honest, I guess if we had separate accounts, but you were putting the bulk in our joint account, it wouldn't matter anyways.
All right. So let's talk about maybe why some people may have separate bank accounts. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I know an individual and they have separate accounts, and I know one of the reasons why they have separate accounts is because they don't really want their partner to know what kind of bread they're bringing home. Which, listen,
not that they're doing something shady on the side, but they just don't want them to know, I guess, their value in dollars and cents.
Yeah. And that's an interesting thing, right? Because, and we'll tackle this question coming up, but there's always a sense of, okay, well, you have two people who are together and one person is making more money than the other person. So
Yeah. So is it like a prepare for the worst, hope for the best? Like that's
I think in some cases it comes down to this. If you have common goals, right? And the perception is you're making X, but you're really making X times 2.
Yep.
So if you're in a situation where your partner likes to spend,
Yeah.
you know, one of those recreational shoppers, their budget in their mind is lower. Now, if they find out that you got them stacks over there,
They might go a little
they
bit
might go and
extra.
start spend extra.
Yeah.
And so it's not from a point of, oh, I'm not being well, I can't say I'm not being transparent, but it's not from coming from a malicious perspective of trying to hide things. It's a situation where, all right, in order for us to hit these goals,
Right.
you know, I know how this person is and I know how they move.
Right.
So I need to carry a little extra so we can get to where we need to get to.
Right. So, yeah, trying to give the cushion,
Yeah, I mean,
you know, where, yeah, like this is your budget.
yeah, I mean, listen, from the perspective of, all right, listen, this is all we got, baby. You can't be spending more than this
Right.
because, you know, this is all we got. Now, this goes back to what that very wise old lady told you.
Yeah.
You keep that on the side.
Well, that's
So-
interesting, right? Because, like, in that situation, too, if one, makes me think of that older lady, is if one is making more money and the other one is kind of relying on them, and it doesn't need to be man or woman these days, is the one that makes less should always have something stowed away, because should something happen, they can't, rely on that additional income.
Well, I'm going to tell you this. If you ain't got no prenup, you giving me mine.
But on the flip side, like you just said, like, this person's not trustworthy to handle all the money. So then they also need to put some on the side.
Yeah, and I think I think that people
such different sides of the story.
Yeah, I think people need to be honest with themselves because if you can't handle the money, and when I say the money, look, sometimes people get money and it burns a hole in their pocket.
Yeah.
Sometimes people want to go out and get their wants before their needs are taken care of. And not every couple is always on the same page. I was talking about, all the different types of shop. Well, listen, we've been spending a lot of money lately, but it's not based off of stuff that we kind of want. It's some of those needs. But, if you have someone who is a recreational shopper and they just go out and shop, you know what I mean? You got to control that. The other aspect of the whole making more money than the other person, I guess the question becomes this. If you're making more money than your partner, does that give you, or is it perceived, and I think this depends on the individual, that you have more power in the relationship?
Personally, I would say no. Hurry up, make that money so I can retire. But I'm sure it could potentially cause animosity if, right, one of the persons feels like they should be making more money, or maybe they do feel like less in control because the other one makes more money. Whether or not the person is behaving in that manner isn't something that they're internalizing. Now, if they're behaving in that manner, that's a completely different story. And
I'm making the bread.
Yeah, like you can't. Listen, I said kitchen this year. You can't tell me no.
Yeah, well,
because
and
it's my money,
Yeah, and that's why I said perceive. But I think at the same time, too, when we talk about people perceiving things, that's internal. Mm-hmm. And I've seen where that can actually cause an issue. And maybe that's why you got to have that separate bank account so that person don't see what you got in the bank.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe I should just start putting something to the side for my kitchen.
Listen, you in that kitchen.
I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. I promised I'd leave the kitchen alone for a while.
I think I wonder. So I saw KRS One said there was a video that he was talking to some young individuals, and I had this conversation with the fellows we have every year, right? We have knowledge that some younger individuals don't have, but the younger individuals have knowledge that we don't have. Mm-hmm. And our environment, the way we grew up and formed and shaped who we are and how we move, the same as theirs. And I wonder if one person making more than the other is even relevant. Now, I don't want to say relevant, is even an issue, because I see some of the younger generation coming up. They're very different with how they go about things. I will say this too. They're much more accepting than a lot of the older generations. So I just wonder that, because it's not something that I actually have access to.
Right. Well, I feel like the generation before us, right, gender played a major role in that. And
True.
I'm wondering if like that has slowly dissipated, like, because the man was the breadwinner.
I can tell you now, in this current generation, there's no, roles are ambiguous. You know what I mean? Women empowerment is a real thing.
It is.
Look at all those movies.
That's right.
Can you give me a little more than it is? That's right.
Well, I was going to make a sarcastic comment, but then I couldn't think of a funny sarcastic comment. So
I see. I laid it up there. You had an opportunity to knock it out of the park, and you swung and you missed.
I did. So I know even in our personal situation, we've flip-flopped. Like sometimes it's been you, sometimes it's been me, and back and forth it's gone.
You're talking about the money?
Yeah.
I'm talking about the roles, flip-flop.
Well, that's what I was like talking about. So, and I know
I'd make that bread so I could stay home.
Same. But right, I just don't see it as much in the younger generation.
Yeah, and I think from what you said about us, again, I don't get involved in the banking stuff. I mean, that money comes in, it goes into the bank, and I don't really see it.
Comes in, it goes out.
And the other part about that too is, again, there's that trust. Now, if you break that trust, there's going to be repercussions. But there's that trust aspect of it. So it comes in, and I'm not worried about it.
Yeah.
So I do think that we started this off talking about the, separate accounts, like the couple that pays together stays together. That's going to be the new phrase. The couple that pays together stays together. So I do think that whether or not you have separate bank accounts and whether or not it's a pro or a con, I think it depends on the individuals involved. There are pros to each side, and there are definitely some cons to each side. I think that when you have to have the conversation, or where you get to a point where these two lives are starting to intertwine, you really need to have a conversation to see how you're going to set those things up. Because ultimately, you can end up in a situation where you can inadvertently cause unnecessary grief based off that situation. So it's best to have a conversation to clear all that stuff up.
Yeah, I feel like regardless of which one it is, do you have to have common goals. You have to agree. You have to then plan for that stuff, and then to avoid like any kind of animosity or issues where it's going to cause,
beef,
people being upset, over situations, and I think as long as you talk it out, then it's good, regardless of which way you prefer, unless, again, it has to be common. If one wants separate and the other one wants joint, then that is... Yeah,
then you got some problems. Then that's where that compromise comes in. You're going to have to figure something out. Or decide, hey, listen, you don't want me seeing your money? You don't want to see me.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
All right. Now that we put that to bed, it's time for the realization of the week. And you have a realization for this week.
I do. So my realization this week is, regardless of how busy I am, as long as I feel like I have control, like it's not out of control, I guess I should say, I have a plan, I feel always so much better. But when it's just like chaos, and it could be even like less work to do, I feel more internal chaos, we'll say, and it's just crazy. So I feel like I'm a very, I don't want to say scheduled person, but as long as I have it in my mind, like a game plan, what I'm going to do, it could be chaos all around me, but internally I'll be all right. That was my realization.
Well, that's good to know. I learned two things from that, and and I'm gonna tell you those two things, and we're gonna end this episode. Number one, you are a person who needs to be scheduled, but you don't always stick to the schedule. And number two, you need to learn to embrace the chaos. And with that being said, thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next time.
That's it for this week's episode of the Lunch with Sandy podcast. Thanks for listening. We'd love to hear your feedback and comments on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at Lunch with Sandy. And be sure to follow us on your favorite podcast app. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to rate and review us. Thanks again for listening to the Lunch with Sandy podcast.